The forecourt at Stratton Defence had been pressure washed twice that week, and you could smell it, that wet concrete smell under the marquee, the smell of a company trying very hard. Eleanor Whitlock noticed it the way she noticed most things, sideways, while appearing to read the laminated program she had no intention of reading. 63 years old, gray coat she'd had 11 years, sensible shoes. She had told the organizers she preferred not to be announced. They had taken her at her word, which suited her, because a person who is not announced gets to watch. And there was a great deal worth watching at Stratton Defence that morning. The occasion was an open day dressed as something grander, innovation showcase, the banners said, in a blue that matched the carpet that matched the lanyards. Stratton was in the final fortnight of bidding for the Halbridge program, a long, fat, multi-year contract for the maintenance and refit of a fleet of vehicles the Army had run hard for a decade and meant to run for another, and everyone on that forecourt knew it, and everyone was performing for the people who would decide. The board members performed confidence. The engineers performed casual genius beside their display rigs, and Marcus Greer, chief executive, performed Marcus Greer, which was a full-time job he did with real commitment. She'd watched him for 20 minutes before he ever came near her. He moved through his own showcase like weather. You could track him by the way people straightened. He had a way of putting a hand on a younger man's shoulder that was not warmth exactly. It was placement, the way you'd reposition a chair. When a journalist asked him something he didn't like, he laughed first and answered second, and the laugh did the work. Whitlock had spent 40 years in rooms full of men who needed to be the largest object present, and she had developed, in self-defense, a kind of allergy to the type, a faint physical tightening at the back of the jaw. Greer brought it on within a minute. The single dad arrived at 11:15, and he arrived wrong. Not wrong as a person, wrong for the forecourt. Everybody else had got the memo about the open day being a performance. He had come to do a job. He drove a flatbed in through the contractor gate. Whitlock saw it because she'd positioned herself where she could see the gate, old habit, and the flatbed had a winch and a name on the door, DOYLE Salvage and METALS. The lettering faded on the left where the sun hit it. He climbed down in work boots and a fleece with a tear at the cuff, and he had a girl with him, 8 or 9, in a purple coat, who should by rights have been in school and clearly knew it, the way she hung close to his leg with the slightly guilty brightness of a child on an unexpected day out. He'd come for the skips. That was the unglamorous truth of it, which Whitlock pieced together from the clipboard he carried and the direction he headed. Stratton had a standing arrangement with a metals merchant for the swarf and the offcuts and the dead stock, the heavy industrial waste a place like that throws off, and somebody had failed to tell somebody that the collection was scheduled for the same morning as the showcase, and so here was Sam Doyle, walking his flatbed and his daughter straight across the polished face of Marcus Greer's big day. She watched him for a minute before any of it kicked off, because watching was the job she'd given herself, and there were things in that minute worth keeping. The way he checked the gate behind him for the girl before he checked it for the truck. The way he dressed her warm and dressed himself in whatever was nearest, the torn cuff, a fleece gone thin at the elbows, but the child in a good coat, zipped to the chin. He crouched once to retie her shoelace without being asked, the automatic competence of a man who has done it 5,000 times and will do it 5,000 more, and the girl rested a hand flat on the top of his head for balance while he did it, and neither of them remarked on it. And that small, unremarked thing told Whitlock more about Sam Doyle's life than any file would have. A man whose daughter steadies herself on his head without thinking about it is a man who is reliably, daily there. The girl was reading everything off a sign by the visitor entrance, out loud, the way that age does. Innovation showcase. Dad, what's a showcase? It's when people show you their stuff. What stuff? Big stuff, trucks. Can we see the trucks? We're not stopping, love, we're getting the metal and we're going. You said we might get chips. After, if you're good. I'm always good. You're sometimes good. She'd grinned at that, gap-toothed, entirely unbothered, and gone back to reading signs, and Doyle had almost smiled at the back of her purple hood, and Whitlock, 40 feet away with a laminated program she wasn't reading, had thought, there it is, the whole economy of a man's heart, right there, getting chips after. You could have fixed it in 10 seconds. A word, a redirected hand, sorry mate, can you swing round the back, we've got the brass in today. Doyle would have said no problem and gone. Whitlock had seen 1,000 small frictions resolved that way by people with the smallest amount of grace. Greer did not have the smallest amount of grace. He had something else, and it chose that moment to come out. He'd been mid-anecdote with 2 men from the ministry. Whitlock knew one of them slightly, a procurement type named Caraway, and the flatbed and the work boots and the torn cuff cut across his eyeline at precisely the wrong angle, and something in him couldn't let it pass. She watched him excuse himself from the ministry men with a little asterisk one moment. This is priceless asterisk expression, the expression of a man about to be amusing at someone's expense, and walk over, and she felt the jaw thing again, harder. Can I help you? Not a question. Greer had a good voice, that was the thing, a warm broadcast voice, and he used it now like a man flicking ash. Doyle looked up from his clipboard. DOYLE Salvage, here for the metals lift, the 11 o'clock. He half-turned, looking for the bays. If you can point me at. Today, Greer let the word hang, looked theatrically left and right at the marquee, the carpet, the lanyards. You're collecting bins, today. That's the booking I've got. Doyle's voice was even. He had a flat northern way of talking, no decoration on it. Somebody can ring the office, it'll be in the... I'm sure it will. Greer had picked up an audience now. That was the thing about a man like him. He could feel the gathering the way a shark feels blood, the ministry men drifting closer, a couple of board members, an engineer with a coffee. He turned to play to them and turned his back half on Doyle while he did it, which was its own small surgery. Do you know what we do here? Genuinely. Do you know what this company makes? Vehicles. Doyle said it like a man answering a question that bored him. I've worked on a few. You've, Greer laughed, the laugh that did the work. Right. Of course you have. He gestured, an open-handed sweep that took in the gleaming display rigs, the banners, the future. This is the most advanced drivetrain integration facility in the country. We have people in this building with doctorates. And the gate let in a, he searched for it, found it, enjoyed it, rag and bone outfit, in the middle of the Halbridge showcase, with a child. The girl in the purple coat had gone very still against her father's leg. So here's what's going to happen. Greer's voice dropped into the reasonable register, which was worse than the loud one. You're going to put your little one back in the truck, and you're going to take your skips and your clipboard, and you're going to go back to your scrapyard, and you're going to let the adults get on with the actual work. Yeah, there's a good man. Whitlock had folded the laminated program into a tube, without noticing she was doing it. Here is what she expected, from 40 years of watching this exact transaction between a powerful man and a man he decided was nothing. She expected Doyle to flush, to mutter, to fold. That was the choreography. The big object got bigger and the small one got smaller, and everybody went back to their coffee slightly ashamed and entirely unchanged. Doyle didn't fold. That was the first thing that made her look at him properly, the way you look up when a tune goes somewhere you didn't expect. He didn't square up either, didn't do the wounded pride thing. He just looked at Greer for a moment, a long, unbothered moment, the look of a man assessing a load to see if it'll hold, and then he crouched down to his daughter's level, ignoring the CEO entirely, and said something to her too low to carry, and the girl nodded, and he straightened up. Where do you want the skips? He said. Not sorry. Not asterisk, of course, sir. Just the job again, like Greer's whole performance had been whether he was waiting out. It landed wrong for Greer, you could see it. He'd wanted a flinch, and he'd got a man asking him a logistics question. The little muscle in his jaw went. Are you deaf? I said. Heard you. Doyle hooked the clipboard under his arm. But I'm booked till 1 and your lads loaded these skips, not me, and if I drive off without them somebody in your accounts office rings my office Monday asking where their money is. So, he wasn't unfriendly about it. That was the maddening thing, you could tell it was maddening. Where do you want the empties? Caraway, the ministry man, made a small sound that might have been a cough. And it was then, with Greer's color up and the girl in the purple coat watching her father be talked to like a stray, and the whole polished morning balanced on the edge of going properly sour, that Alina Whitlock found she had stopped pretending to read her program, and had started, without quite deciding to walk over. She wasn't sure even then that she'd say anything. She told herself she was only going to get a better view. That was a lie, and a small part of her knew it was a lie because she had recognized something. Not the man's face, not yet, she was still 3 steps away and the years do their work on a face. She'd recognized the voice. That flat northern evenness, no decoration on it, I've worked on a few. She had heard that voice before, once on the worst night of a bad year, coming out of a radio she'd been certain was going to give her nothing but the names of the dead. She just couldn't place it yet, and she had learned, a long time ago, never to ignore the back of her own neck. Mr. Greer. She used the warm broadcast trick back on him, pitched to Carrie, and it worked the way it always worked. Heads turned, including his. Sorry to interrupt. I wonder if I could borrow this gentleman for a moment. Greer did the calculation she'd watched 100 men do. Gray coat, old shoes, no lanyard with a flag on it. A woman of an age he'd file under asterisk somebody's wife, somebody's secretary, lost. She watched him decide she didn't count, and she watched him decide to be gracious about it because there were ministry men present and graciousness photographed well. And you are? In the way, probably, she smiled. Won't be a minute. She turned to Doyle, and now she was close, and now she had the face as well as the voice, older, weathered, a scar through one eyebrow that hadn't been there or had it, and the name on the truck door finished the sentence her neck had started. Doyle. Not the surname she'd have reached for. He'd been sergeant to her, and then a casualty list and then a blank, the way they go blank when they leave and you lose them. But the eyes were the eyes. It's Doyle, she said, quietly, just for him. Isn't it, Sam Doyle, Helmand, the Wadi at Nowzad? She watched it cross his face, not shock. He wasn't a man who did shock, but a slow recalibration, the load-assessing look again, turned on her this time. And then the thing under it which she hadn't expected and which got her square in the chest. Not pleasure, not pride. Wariness. A flinch held very still. The look of a man who had spent a long time not being that person and would rather you hadn't found him. Major Whitlock, he said it slowly. Then, catching up to the gray in her hair and the way the morning had bent around her without her saying so, no, more than that now. More than that now, she agreed. Behind her, Greer had not gone away. Men like Greer never go away. They hover at the edge of a thing they've lost control of, looking for the handle. I'm sorry, he said, in the tone of a man being patient with the elderly. Do you too? Give us a moment, Marcus. She didn't turn round to say it. She'd never met him, and she used his first name like she'd known him 20 years, and she felt rather than saw him absorb that, the small wrongness of it, a stranger in a charity shop coat dismissing him on his own forecourt with the ease of someone who did it for a living. Macy, Doyle said to the girl, go and sit in the cab a minute, love. Put the radio on. Is it a friend of yours, Dad? Go on. The girl went with one backward look, and Whitlock noticed the look because it was an adult's look on a child's face, protective. I'm watching. I'll come back if I need to. She'd seen that look on Doyle himself, on the worst night when he'd. But that was the thing she couldn't say on a forecourt, with Greer hovering and Caraway listening, and the engineer with the coffee pretending not to. So she said the small true thing instead. I didn't know you got out. 2014. He shrugged one shoulder, knee, and other reasons. The asterisk other reasons came out flat and closed a door he wasn't opening. Took over me Dad's yard. It's a living. And the salvage. She glanced at the truck, the faded lettering, the winch. You always could fix anything with a dead engine. For the first time something moved at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one. Well, engines don't talk back. Some of them do. Some of them, he allowed. And for a second, just a second, on Marcus Greer's pressure-washed forecourt, the open day went away, and it was two people who had been somewhere terrible together standing in the ordinary daylight on the far side of it, neither of them saying the thing, both of them knowing the other knew it. She had the whole of it back now, whether she wanted it or not. That was the trouble with the quiet ones. They didn't bring the memory up gently, the way a film would with the edges softened. It arrived entire. The heat first. The waddy had held the day's heat the way an oven holds it after you've turned it off, so that even with the light going you couldn't get a clean breath. The lead truck burning, and the particular sound a vehicle makes burning, which is not dramatic, which is almost domestic, a steady crackle and tick. Lance Corporal Ferris with his leg wrong under him behind the second truck, and Whitlock, Major Whitlock then, 29 and cert, she was about to lose all of them, on the radio getting nothing, getting weather, getting we'll see what we can do from men 100 miles off, while the light failed and the fire painted everyone's position for anyone who cared to look. She remembered thinking, with a flat clarity that had frightened her later, I am going to write these letters. She had started composing them. That was the state of it. And then Doyle. 23, a mechanic, not a man whose job it was to go anywhere, crawling up the dead ground to the second truck with a tool roll clamped in his teeth because he needed both hands, and getting in under the wrecked engine while the world came apart around him. And this was the part the manual said was impossible, the part she'd put in the citation he then refused, bringing it back. A truck that had taken a blast and died and had no business ever turning over again, and Doyle swearing at it. She could hear him swearing at it on the net. A steady, filthy, patient monologue. Come on, you. Come on. Don't you dare. There you are. There you are. And the engine catching and holding. He'd driven Ferris and 3 others out, then turned around and gone back into the wadi on foot for the second load. On foot. Past the burning truck. She had ordered him not to. He had turned his radio down, not off down, so he could say afterward with a straight face that the order had been unclear. You turned your radio down, she said now quietly on the forecourt. It wasn't a question. Reception's terrible out there. He didn't look at her when he said it. The corner of his mouth did the thing again. Always was. There was no music for it then either. There'd just been the dark coming down and the count coming right, all of them. Every man she'd been certain she would lose, and a 23-year-old mechanic wiping his hands on a rag and asking her, in that flat northern voice with no decoration on it, whether anybody had any water because he was parched. She had gone away and been quietly sick behind a Land Rover and come back and tried to put him up for a medal. She'd never managed it. He'd seen to that himself. Whitlock had been to a great many reunions of that kind. They never went the way films did. There was no rush of music. There was just this, the quiet, the not saying, the enormous weight sitting politely between two people pretending to talk about engines. Greer broke it, because of course he did. Right, well, this is all very touching. He'd recovered his footing, found his handle. The woman knew the scrap man. The woman was clearly some sort of what? An aunt, an old neighbor, and that made her safely small again. And he could close the whole embarrassing parenthesis and get back to his ministry men. But I do actually need this individual and his vehicle off the showcase floor, so if the reunion could happen at the gate. Marcus. She turned round now. She let him have her full attention for the first time, and she watched him register that it was a different thing than he'd assumed, the way the temperature of a room changes before you've worked out who opened the door. Do you know who this is? I know he's an hour late leaving. Greer smiled at Caraway, sharing the joke, keeping the ministry on his side. Why should I? Yes, she said, you should. She didn't raise her voice. She'd learned long ago that the people worth listening to almost never do. In 2009, she said, I had a vehicle patrol pinned in a dry riverbed outside Now Zad for 9 hours. 2 trucks dead, one of them on fire, men I was responsible for trapped in the open with the light going and no air support I could raise. And the reason I am standing on your nice clean forecourt today, Marcus, instead of being a name your procurement people skim past in an old casualty report, is that a vehicle mechanic, a sergeant, this sergeant went back into that wadi on foot, twice under fire, and got 2 engines that the manual said were dead running again with a multi-tool and a roll of wire and language I won't repeat in front of his daughter, and drove my people out 1 truck at a time. The forecourt had gone a particular kind of quiet, not the dramatic kind, the kind where people stop chewing. He was recommended for something for that, she went on, conversational, almost mild, watching Greer's face do its slow work. He turned it down, wouldn't have it. Said the men who didn't come back didn't get medals, so he wasn't having one either, and you could not move him. I tried. She glanced at Doyle, who was looking at the concrete now, jaw set, hating every word of it, and she felt a stab of something like apology. I know, Sam. I know you don't want this, but he started it, and you're going to let me finish it. So when you tell him to go back to his scrapyard and let the adults do the actual work. She let that sit. I'd think very carefully, Marcus, about which of the 2 men in this conversation has done the actual work. Caraway, the ministry man, was no longer pretending to cough. And Marcus Greer, and this was the part Whitlock had been curious about, the part that told you what a man was actually made of, did not crumble. That's not how it goes, whatever the films say. A man who has spent 30 years being the largest object in every room does not become small in 4 seconds because a woman in an old coat tells him a story. What he did instead was worse for him, and she'd seen it coming. He reached by reflex for the handle that had always worked. He gave a short laugh, but it didn't do the work this time. It came out with a crack in it. Look, that's a hell of a story, and I respect the service. Genuinely, nobody respects the forces more than I. The ministry men's faces were closing. He could feel it, and he sped up. But with respect, I run a $500 million defense business, and I can't have unscheduled vehicles and members of the public wandering through a secure. What's your name? Whitlock asked pleasantly. He stopped. And what? Your name? Your full name and title. I don't have it. She had taken out, from the pocket of the 11-year-old coat, a small battered notebook and a pencil, and she clicked nothing because it was a pencil, and she looked at him over it with the patient, terrible attentiveness of a person who writes things down. Because I'm going to be in a room on Thursday where your company's name comes up, and when someone asks me whether I have a view, I find it helps to have got the details right. It was the notebook that did it. Not the story he could have talked over, given time. Men like him can talk over anything. It was the small, worn notebook, and the pencil and a room on Thursday, and the unhurried way she licked her thumb to turn to a clean page, and the dawning, draining understanding on Marcus Greer's face that he had spent the last 10 minutes performing contempt for a working man in front of the one person on the forecourt whose quiet opinion, on Thursday, in that room, could fold his $500 million business shut like a clasp knife. I didn't catch your name either, he said. Very carefully now, all the broadcast gone out of the voice. No, said Eleanor Whitlock, you didn't. She told him in the end because cruelty bored her and she'd made her point. She put the notebook away. Eleanor Whitlock, she said, I chaired the Halbridge Capability Review. I retired from it in the spring. A beat to let the first part land before the second. And in 3 weeks I take a seat on the oversight board that signs off the framework your bid sits inside. Unpaid, advisory, the smile again but cooler now. They like an old soldier on these things, keeps everyone honest. You could have heard the banners move. Greer's mind was visibly running the tape back, every word of the last 10 minutes. Go back to your scrapyard, let the adults get on with the actual work, rag and bone outfit, with a child running it back and finding her in the frame of every shot, watching, not announced, not lanyarded, writing nothing down until now. Whitlock had watched a lot of men do that particular arithmetic. The face goes through the stages out of order. Denial first, usually, a flailing asterisk, surely it doesn't count, surely I can fix this. And then the cold place underneath where the man works out that no, the thing that happened is the thing that happened, and there were ministry witnesses, and it cannot be unmade. Major General, he couldn't find the register. General Whitlock, I think I think there's been he gestured, a drowning gesture at the whole morning. If I'd known you were. That's the bit I'd sit with if I were you. She said it almost kindly. Not that you did it, that you'd not have done it if you'd known I was watching. She let him hear it. Means you'd do it again, just quieter. She didn't expect him to take that on board. She wasn't naive. A man doesn't rebuild his character on a forecourt because an old woman handed him a hard sentence. The most she expected was that he'd be careful, for a while, the way a dog's careful near the spot it got scalded. And that careful isn't the same as changed, but it's not nothing. It keeps the next Sam Doyle from getting the rough edge. Sometimes that's all the justice that's going. She'd made her peace with that years ago. Doyle, through all of it, had said nothing. He'd stood with his arms folded and his weight back on his heels and let it happen to him, which she understood was a kind of endurance and not agreement. When Greer had finally been peeled away, Carraway took him, a hand on the elbow, a low, urgent word, the ministry closing protectively around its own embarrassment. Doyle exhaled through his nose and looked at her, and it wasn't gratitude. She'd known it wouldn't be. You didn't have to do all that. No. He'd have got bored. I'd have loaded the skips and gone. We do this. He nodded at the truck, at the faded lettering, at the world it stood for. People talk to you like that in the yard. You stop hearing it. It's not, he hunted for it. It doesn't go in after a while. You just see the metal. I know. So you didn't have to. No, she said again. I didn't do it for you, Sam. She watched that land, watched him not quite believe it and then begin to. I did it because that procurement man over there was about to give a great deal of public money to a company run by someone who shows you exactly who he is the second he thinks no one important is looking. And I happened to be the person who knew that the someone he was sneering at had more cold nerve and more use in him than the whole boardroom put together. That's not charity, that's just information getting to where it's needed. She shrugged the way he'd shrugged. You were the evidence. I'd have used anyone. It wasn't true, or it wasn't all of it, and they both knew that too. The debt sitting there unmentioned, 9 hours in a dry riverbed and 2 engines that should have stayed dead. But it let him keep his feet under him, and she'd offered it for exactly that reason, because she'd learned in 40 years that the kindest thing you can hand a proud man is a version of events in which he doesn't have to be grateful. The girl had come back out of the cab. She stood a little way off, the purple coat, the watching, and Doyle's whole body angled toward her without his seeming to notice, the way a plant does to a window. She know, Whitlock asked, any of it. She knows I was a soldier. She knows I fix things. He said it like that was the whole of him and he was content for it to be. She doesn't need the rest. The rest is, he stopped. She doesn't need it. Whitlock looked at the child, and at the man, and at the flatbed with DOYLE Salvage faded on the door, and she thought about the metal he'd refused, and the yard he'd taken over, and the careful flat door he kept shut on the asterisk other reasons. And she understood she was looking at something she'd seen only a handful of times in a long career, and had never stopped being undone by. A man who had been, by any measure that mattered, magnificent, and who had decided, deliberately with his whole stubborn heart, to be ordinary. To be a single dad with a torn cuff who fixed dead engines and raised a watchful girl and let CEOs talk down to him on forecourts because it didn't go in anymore. He just saw the metal. It wasn't defeat. She wanted to be clear with herself that it wasn't defeat. It was a choice, and it might even have been the braver one, braver than the Waddy, some days. And it was absolutely none of Marcus Greer's business, and Marcus Greer had put his hand on it anyway. Skips are round the back of the main shed, she said. Blue line on the floor, you'll see it. I had a wander earlier." "You had a wander?" He almost smiled again. "Course you did." "Old habit, I like to see a place when it's not performing." She put out her hand. "It was a good thing you did, Sam, then and now. I'm glad the yard's a living. I'm glad about her." He took the hand, calloused, careful, a mechanic's grip that knew its own strength and held it back. "Thanks, Major." The old rank on purpose, and she let him have it because it was the closest he'd come to saying the rest. He went to get his daughter. Whitlock watched the purple coat tuck under his arm, watched the girl say something that made him tip his head back, watched the flatbed swing slow and competent toward the blue line on the floor, and then she went and found Caraway, because she had meant every quiet word about Thursday, and she was not a woman who said things she didn't mean. The Halbridge program did not go to Stratton Defence. The official reasons ran to 4 pages and mentioned, in the gray language of these things, concerns regarding leadership culture and supplier-facing conduct, which is the closest a procurement document ever comes to saying we watched the man and we didn't like what we saw. Marcus Greer told people, for a while, that he'd been stitched up by an old woman with a grudge, and some of them believed him, because that story is more comfortable than the other one. Then the contract went elsewhere, and the share price did what share prices do, and the board, which had cheered him on the forecourt, discovered it had always had reservations, and within the year Marcus Greer was a former chief executive, which is a phrase that does a great deal of quiet work. Whitlock didn't follow it closely. She'd done the one thing that was hers to do, put true information where it was needed, and the rest was just consequence finding its level, which it does, given time, more often than the bitter believe. She drove out past the contractor gate as Doyle was winching the last skip onto the flatbed, the girl handing him things he didn't strictly need handing, the two of them in an easy choreography of small tasks, and she didn't stop. You don't, with men like that. You let them be ordinary, because the ordinary is the thing they fought to get back to, and a wave from a general's window only reminds them of the other place. She just slowed, a little going past, and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, the smallest possible salute, the kind you give an equal, and she saw him clock it in the wing mirror and not wave back, only dip his chin, once, the same flat northern economy he'd had at 23 in the worst hour of her life. That evening, in a chip shop in a town she'd never see, Sam Doyle bought his daughter the promised chips and a battered sausage she'd been angling for since breakfast, and they sat in the cab with the heater going and the windows fogging and the radio low. "That lady knew you," Macy said around a chip. "The one in the gray coat, the cross man didn't like her. She's somebody I worked with, long time ago." "Before me." Before you." Macy considered this. Before her was a vast and faintly suspicious country to which she had no passport. Was she your boss? Doyle looked out at the wet street, the chip shop light yellow on the pavement, his daughter's reflection ghosted on the glass beside the real her. Sort of, for a bit. The cross man said go back to your scrapyard. She said it carefully, watching his face, the way she watched it when she wasn't sure if a thing was a hurt or not and was checking whether she should be cross on his behalf. She was a great one for being cross on his behalf. That's not nice. It's a good scrapyard. And here was the thing Whitlock would never know. The small private repair that happened in a fogged-up cab 40 miles from her motorway, which was that Sam Doyle laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and reached over and pinched a chip off his daughter's paper, which was an act of war and entirely deliberate. "It's a brilliant scrapyard," he said, "best in the county, and he can say what he likes, doesn't go in." He tapped his temple. "Remember that, when somebody decides what you are before they've asked, doesn't have to go in." He ate the stolen chip. "You just see the metal." "That doesn't even mean anything, Dad." "It will." She'd be 26 before it did, standing up for somebody small in a room full of people who decided too fast, and she'd hear it come out of her own mouth in his flat voice. "Doesn't go in. You just see the metal, and only then properly understand that her father had been handing her something in a chip shop, the way he handed her wrenches, an item she didn't yet know she'd need. But that was a long way off, and tonight there were chips and the heater ticking and the two of them, which was the whole of what he'd built and exactly as much as he wanted. What stayed with Whitlock on the long road home wasn't Greer's face going through its stages, satisfying as that had been. It was the girl in the purple coat, handing her father a wrench he could have reached himself, and the way he took it from her every time as though she'd done him a genuine service. And what stayed with her was the plain, unfashionable truth that the world is full of men and women being talked down to on forecourts by people who have decided, on the evidence of a torn cuff or an old coat or a faded name on a door, that they are nothing, and that the people doing the deciding are wrong, almost without exception, in ways they will never trouble to discover, because the worth of a person is not stamped on the outside of them where a Marcus Greer can read it at a glance. It's further in. It comes out in dry riverbeds and at school gates, and in the careful way a calloused hand takes a wrench from a small girl who wanted to help. You have to be paying attention to see it. Most people are paying attention to the wrong things, to the lanyard, the share price, the size of the largest object in the room. Alina Whitlock had spent 40 years learning to watch the quiet ones instead. It had never once let her down. And if there was a thing she'd once said after, it was only that the next time a loud man tells a quiet one to go back where he came from and let the adults work, it's worth asking before you laugh along, which of the two has ever actually carried anyone out of the fire. Because it's so often, so very often, not the one doing the talking,